So today's topic is headless services 101 for Sitecore Dinosaurs. Maybe you can say Sitecore developers or Sitecore Dinosaurs, interchangeable at this point in time. So why this topic, and just want to give a little bit background. So Annie and me were chatting like few weeks back. So not few weeks, maybe a month or 2 months back. So we were chatting in general, like how Sitecore is evolving with XM Cloud, with Next.js, Vercel, Docker, containers, and whatnot. So where does this take the Sitecore developers? Previously, Sitecore developer means it's predominantly a .NET developer. So those term is interchangeable, but it is not anymore. So we were just chatting like that, and Annie and me were working on this Sitecore for quite a long time. So I mean, like many of you. So we were thinking like, where does this fit us? I mean, where are we fitting in this whole ecosystem? Then that's where we were finally chatting, and this dinosaur term came. Oh, we are becoming a Sitecore Dinosaurs. Then after a couple of weeks, then I proposed like, okay, let's do one session. Maybe similar kind of people like us, maybe can relate, and maybe they can attach to this session, or they can get some information about this session, and they can further take it forward. And coincidentally, I saw that the dinosaur term when I was searching. So this was also, there was one session in SUG Pune quite a while back about React for dinosaurs, or React for Sitecore Dinosaurs or something. So that was also a good session. I did attend at that time. So it was just a React information for Sitecore developers. So let's get started. My name is Gopikrishna Reddy. So I'm a Sitecore developer. So I've been working on this platform for, I don't know, maybe quite a while now. So one sec, where is this mouse? Bit about me, maybe not that what I've done along, but coincidentally, so today is July 1st, 2023. I actually started my career back in July 1st, 2010. So by today, I complete 13 years. I don't know. I still feel it is 5 or 6 years. I'm only 5 or 6 years experience. But I started programming. I was always developer. So throughout the career, 13 years. Maybe played lead role bit here and there, but I always wanted to be a developer. I always preferred being a developer. So I started programming in 2010, and yeah, again, joined some small startup and learned web forms on the go. And like 4 years I worked there. Then moved to another company. Again, there was no MVC training, put on MVC project, learned for 1 or 2 years. And again, joined a Sitecore partner. That's where I started working on Sitecore. So learned Sitecore MVC or whole Sitecore on the go again. There was no training or anything. And yeah, been working since then on Sitecore, MVC or SXA or anything else, Content Hub, different platforms. But predominantly, you can see one common pattern in all this is C#. So if any web forms or MVC or SXA or anything, I'm still writing the code in C#, pretty much predominantly backend. I did write few things in JavaScript, but very, very minimal. So when we started career, there was no JavaScript developers. We used to write it, JavaScript code as well. But later, then front-end development came separate. So we always have front-end developers. They take care of all the JavaScript and everything. We used to write only backend. But I think technology always comes back to the full circle, right? So we are going back to the place where we started, where we are seeing more predominantly full stack development. So more and more developers we are looking for is full stack. Oh, they have JSS experience, they have JavaScript experience at React or Angular or Vue or whatever it is, and as well as backend experience. So that's where this is. This is what my experience is. So now you can feel that I am currently a Sitecore for various reasons. I didn't get a chance to work on JSS. And also I was not much interested to work on as well, because I don't know, for what other reasons, I never liked very much about JavaScript frameworks. So I mostly stick to the backend part of it. So that's where my Sitecore journey is till now. Now, who is this session for? I see that there are a lot of people here. I don't want you guys to sit here and find nothing useful. That's why I just want to give heads up itself, like who is this session for? So mainly if anyone is having more or less similar experience as me, like you might mostly worked on Sitecore MVC projects or Sitecore SXA projects. Yeah, any other Sitecore project, that's all. You never worked on JSS. If you are in that category, then this session will be useful for you. If not, if you have started working on JSS also, it will be still useful. But if you have already worked on a project with JSS or headless services, this session would be not much useful for you. You can feel free to drop off. So otherwise, I'm trying to give you overview of what is this headless services in Sitecore world. So just brief agenda. We will see headless services, headless CMS first, and we'll see what does it mean in Sitecore world for traditionally how we build an MVC, how it differs for headless projects, and rendering types and few concepts around the headless services, and what's the developer role is taking into the, how the developer role is shaping in the whole ecosystem. So headless CMS, you might have heard this or heard this buzzword a lot, right? So headless CMS everywhere. Simple definition everywhere you can see is, oh, separate backend and front end. I'm a developer. If you tell backend and front end, I assume that backend means it's a server side, some code I'm writing. Front end means some presentation or some JavaScript, HTML, CSS. But this terminology is different in this context. So this is in the CMS context, they are different. So backend here means whatever the content authoring operations. So generally Sitecore content authors log in and they do all the Sitecore operations, right? So that's all the backend content management activities. Front end here means how we are presenting this content to the user, to the web, to the visitors. So that is what is backend and front end here. When we are in the traditional or in the current Sitecore instances also, we build the content management. We install Sitecore, it comes with the content management, and there is a front end where we deploy our code and web browser. This worked well till now, but the amount of devices or amount of the way customers or consumers consume that content is changing a lot. It's not simple web browser, right? Even every one of us have smart devices. Smartphones, even IoT devices, smart watches, single page apps and social media. Even IoT. So you are consuming, or the users are consuming from different systems. But here your front end is very much sit with your CMS. But you want to deliver the content for different systems, different devices. So how do we do that? That's where the whole concept came, Headless CMS, where you are splitting your front end from your content management. So there is no front end anymore here in this side, whereas it replaced with APIs. So, okay, now CMSs are telling, okay, we will do content management activities as it is, but we will provide the APIs. Let you guys, the development teams, choose whatever technology you want, however the way you want to build, just use the APIs, consume that APIs, whichever the format it is, and just build your apps. So that is where the separation of things coming from backend and front end. So let's see this is a general headless CMS across the ecosystems, for CMS ecosystem. But what it is meant, what it means for Sitecore. So if you go for traditional Sitecore CMS, let's not complicate with CM, CD, all these roles and everything. Let's take the simple use case. So if you are started learning Sitecore, first step, what you do, you will go and install your site. I mean, install a Sitecore in your local. So maybe latest is 10.3. You just install a 10.3 instance in your local. Now, next step, what we do, we are going to build our custom webs. I mean, you are going to build your website, right? So you create a Visual Studio solution, you build your project, you build your components, layouts, and everything, and you deploy that to. I mean, you publish that Visual Studio project to the same Sitecore instance. Okay, so your custom ASP.NET site is sitting inside Sitecore instance, all the renderings, everything and all. So we have two main users, right? Content authors. So content authors are hitting this box to manage their content, content authoring activities, create, update, all these things. Your visitors are also hitting this because they are consuming that content from the presentation details which we defined. I mean, marketers define and we coded for it. So this is the general ecosystem. I mean, if you are going for SXA or if you are going for normal MVC projects or even web forms or XSLT renderings. So this is how we are doing it. We were always deploying it to Sitecore instance. How many of you faced issues when you first time learning, or even till now also? How many of you missed like, oh, I didn't disable the web config replaced in the Sitecore instance. It blown up like whole my Sitecore is not working anymore. So I had to replace Sitecore. First thing we always learn is take a backup of your whole www folder so that anything you by mistake you replace it, you can get back from the backup files. And similarly, global ASX files or any DLLs compatibility issues, because Sitecore is having some DLL versions with Newton Soft, JSON, or dependency injection abstractions libraries, a lot of these libraries. I mean, if you have worked on upgrade projects and all, you would know that these all the assemblies versions and all. So ideally, because we are deploying to the same location and in the same box, everything sits. This is all the traditional it is. Now, if you go for the headless world, how does it sit? You are still installing your Sitecore in your local if you are installing Sitecore. So everything sits fine, your 10.3 installed. And you build your custom ASP.NET site, but rather than deploying to Sitecore, you are deploying it separate. So separate in sense, if you go to infrastructure as a service, if you go to IaaS website, you are creating a new website, but rather than pointing to the same Sitecore instance, how you do with the traditional development, you are pointing to some other place where you deployed your Visual Studio website, Visual Studio projects. So conceptually, I'm telling. So then this becomes a different IaaS website. This becomes a different IaaS website. Both are different. They are not sitting in the same location. Now, your content authors are dealing with your Sitecore instance where they're creating items and data sources and pages, everything. And your visitors are browsing that ASP.NET site and they're showing all the, they're able to see all the content and browsing the pages and everything. But where is the connection now? Your content is sitting in the Sitecore instance because that's where your content authors are working. But you want to show the content from ASP.NET site, custom ASP.NET, which is sitting somewhere else. So the connection here is APIs. So we use APIs to consume that content from custom ASP.NET site or whatever the React or Angular, whichever the custom site through Sitecore instance. This is all about Headless Sitecore CMS. I know that like a lot of pictures you just head removed and you're trying to understand what it is like in Sitecore terminology, in Sitecore when you are working. So this is what it is in simplest way. So your custom ASP.NET site is sitting separately, your Sitecore instance is sitting separately. Only way they're communicating is through APIs. So you're hitting API and getting the data. It is still master web database and everything, that's fine. But you are getting the data from APIs. We'll explore further like some more concepts around this. So how does it scale? Now your Sitecore instance is one, it is sitting there. Your visitors, you can build a ASP.NET site and it is consuming APIs. Consuming that content through API. Now, if you go to other one, maybe you build some kiosk, like we recently will build one kiosk machine, some website. So that Next.js kiosk you can build, but you are still consuming, you are reading the content from Sitecore instance, that through APIs. And again, if you are building any React Native or any mobile app, you can still consume the content, you are using the APIs. So again, you might get a question that how does it differs? I have a APIs in previously as well, Sitecore Services Client, item APIs, and I can build the custom APIs as well, like custom controller, custom web APIs, everything. So that all still there. The biggest challenge, I think, Balaji, my old friend, recently asked in the, I don't know whether he's here or not, I can't see the names. He asked one good question in the Sitecore Slack, like, how does it differ? I already have all the Sitecore Services Client, everything is there. What does it GraphQL is advantage for me? I mean, why do I need to use a GraphQL or layout service, something else? So biggest difference, there are some fundamental differences, but predominantly main difference I found along all these lines is you don't get the presentation information when you are using the traditional existing APIs, which is Sitecore Services Client and item web API, all these things. You don't get the presentation details. I mean, presentation, the renderings and the placeholders and all. You can get the item and you can get the item fields and everything, but you don't get the presentation details. So this is where Sitecore Headless CMS differs from other CMS platforms. So if you go for, I don't know how many of you are aware of Contentful, or for that matter, in Sitecore itself, there is a new product which is Content Hub 1 that is more or in line with Contentful. So these are what you call pretty much traditional, or not traditional, very bare bone headless CMS. So they just provide you an API. You can consume that content. So you use that API, maybe CDN provided APIs. You just hit that API, get the data, you build the presentation however you want. So this is just a REST API or GraphQL API, you are just consuming the content. But in Sitecore world, this headless CMS is, in Sitecore, this XM, XP, these products are different. Why? Because your presentation still sits on Sitecore. Your presentation still, in the hands of content authors. They can still handle all this content. But if you go to Content Hub 1 and Contentful, they are not able to handle the presentation. They can only manage the content. Your developers will handle the presentation. Like how, okay, this component need to come first, this component need to come down, or in this way. But whereas in Sitecore world, even if you are going to headless CMS, still content authors holds that page building and everything. So that's what the big advantage of headless CMS in Sitecore world. So if you get a doubt of like what is the difference with the item service, Sitecore Services Client, all these existing, predominantly main thing is the presentation details. You don't get the presentation details what you get with the headless services. Let's move on. There are a few more concepts I want you to aware, because these concepts you keep seeing when you are going on the web and reading in the headless CMS concepts or even in the Sitecore documentation. So some of them are like rendering types. So rendering types is not our controller or view or accessibility renderings. These are like sublayouts or layouts. These are rendering types of web. So you have like 4 of them. I mean, you can differentiate, mix and match, but server-side rendering. So you have a server-side rendering. This is what we are aware of. Maybe we don't know that it is called as a server-side rendering, but we are aware of this because MVC and SXA, we build the sites in this way. So server-side rendering, where when user requests for a web page, that request will be sent to server from the client browser. So the request is executed on the server. In the traditional ASP.NET Web Forms, we have a like page life cycle. In the MVC, we have a request life cycle. So all the requests will execute. It can, I mean, it binds the Sitecore content using the APIs. It might be, if you are using third-party APIs, maybe build that content also, bind everything together and build a HTML and send to the client in the browser, and browser displays the web page. That's a server-side rendering. What is the server-side rendering options in Sitecore world? We have MVC, SXA, and Sitecore Headless Services as well. Sitecore Headless Services mainly .NET Core, Next.js, Angular, React, and Vue. So all these are supports you server-side rendering. Now, if you go to client-side rendering means in a traditional web, you know about single-page applications where when you request for a page, server will send just a minimal amount of HTML, just a basic bare bone. If you've seen the React app, you will know, like most of the time, you will just have one div tag, like a root something. It will be sent and JavaScript will be sent. So in the JavaScript, now in the client browser, JavaScript will be keep asking for the APIs, keep hitting the APIs and fetching the data and binding onto the HTML. So the HTML will be like loading slowly with all the content. But whereas server side, everything loads from the server, you'll get the HTML. But whereas client side, still client browser does the heavy lifting. So headless services, we have Angular, React, and Vue. These are the Sitecore supported ones for the client side rendering. Now, next two concepts are maybe not very much talked about when Sitecore JSS released and from last few years, but it is very much talked in the recent world with the Next.js, mainly in the picture of Sitecore world, Next.js, and Vercel. So what is static site generator? But static site generator concept exists like a long time. So this is going with the going world now. I do had my website hosted on like Hexo, I forgot the name, Hexo. There was some static site generator blogging engine. So what I used to do is I used to write my blog posts. I ran some node compilation. It outputs me HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And I host that in the GitHub pages. So that is a simple way to understand static site generation. When someone browsing my website, all they get is, they don't need any processing, right? HTML only is there. They can get the HTML very quickly. So that is what a static site generator. So in Sitecore world, if you think, you have all the Sitecore items and everything. When you publish, maybe you are running some build where that build will build all these pages and outputs them as a HTML before anyone hits the page, before anyone hits the website. So maybe if you have 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 pages, everything will be HTML pages, and it will be stored on the server, maybe on CDNs. Then it will be served to the customer, client, whoever is hitting the request. So when content updates, so you publish again. When you making a change to content, you publish again. That build regenerates all the HTML and CDN gets updated. Then the new files come. So obviously you can't have you can't have personalized content. You don't have there is certain limitations, but this is one of the ways, static site generation. So Next.js supports this static site generation, and another one is incremental static regeneration. Both are very, very much related. So static site generation has some disadvantages, because even if you update couple of pages, you might have thousands or 10,000 or pages. You might have updated content in certain places, but still it has to regenerate every page. But in the incremental static regeneration, it will not update everything. Rather, it will only regenerate what pages you have updated. But you have to keep in mind, if the build time is very less, you don't need this overhead, because there are some disadvantages. Again, don't want to go too deep into this, but there are some advantages for all these things: server side, client side, static side, and ISR. So there are some uses. So whenever you are trying to learn these concepts as well. So each one has some use case. So recently when we built one for one of the museum here in Australia. So we built one website. Obviously the museum website is on Next.js and server-side rendering deployed on Vercel, but we do have static site generation for one of the kiosk machine. They're running some campaign, and that campaign for some of the things that has like some, I don't know, I don't remember how many number of pages, but minimal number of pages. But those are kind of a brochure pages. On the kiosk, users will swap and browse them. So we don't need any personalization. We don't need all this kind of fancy things. So rather we just use the static site generation. Hosting is much cheaper, and when if at all there is an update, we build and we regenerate that content. So there are some use cases like this. You get into it. Next one is, so these are some of the concepts. Next, move on to what is headless services we keep talking about in Sitecore world. So headless services is what makes your normal CMS into headless CMS. So you traditionally are installing 10.3. I mean, whatever that you download from the Sitecore and you install in your local. But Sitecore headless services, this is what making your CMS into headless CMS with all the features. So there are some fancy definitions, but it mainly provides you the decoupling between that content repository or the backend activities from the presentation. So obviously it is not something new. If you are on the web reading, this is also used to call as JSS. I mean, still most of us prefer to call it with JSS, but it becomes a big umbrella. So headless services become a big name, and under that JSS become one part of it. So it is released way back in 2017 with Sitecore 9, and this code is open source. So JSS functionality code is an open source. I don't think so ASP.NET Core rendering SDK code is, but JSS client SDK code is open source. So this is one of the first open source project in Sitecore world. So formerly called Sitecore JavaScript services. Now it supports, so headless services sits on the top. You have two branches. One is JSS SDKs. Another one is ASP.NET Core rendering SDK. So again, next under JSS, you have Next.js, React, Angular, Vue, and ASP.NET Core. There are some differences among all of these, but Sitecore is supporting all of these things. But it's although it gets recorded, but more and more we are seeing the projects are related to Next.js going on. So most of the new builds are coming with Next.js because Sitecore is partnered with Next.js, partnered with Vercel. Vercel is a company who or implemented Next.js, or I don't know, you call implementation or you released Next.js. So they have strong support for deployments and everything. So Vercel is partnered with Sitecore. So they are predominantly building a lot of things in Sitecore world with Next.js first-hand support. They're still supporting all the other React, Angular, Vue, and ASP.NET Core, but bigger chunk is getting for Next.js. So most of the new projects, whatever we are seeing, are getting started in Next.js. But there are obviously already existing JSS applications which are implemented in React, Angular, and even in ASP.NET Core. But more and more is going towards Next.js because of the static site generation capabilities and all these things. They're not available in other platform, other React or Angular things. Okay. Let's move on and see some of the terminology which are very much in all the documentation in headless services. So there are quite a bunch of them. So layout service, content resolvers, rendering host, GraphQL, rendering engine. These are not there in Sitecore normal world, XM and XP and traditional CMS. So when we were learning MVC first time, we had all these controller renderings, data sources, everything concept came. When we started learning SXA, it came with all the things newly again, page designs, partial designs, asset optimizers, I don't know, like a lot of terminologies. Now, JSS also bought its own terminologies, tools, you can say. So those are the terminologies we need to be aware of, at least just to get familiarized with, so that when you are reading something, it makes sense, rather than you're like, oh, what is this terminology? I don't know. So let's dwell into each of them. Layout service. So what I feel is this is a very core of all these headless services, because this is, in a simplest way to understand, is it is a REST API or REST endpoint layout service. As the name suggests, it is an API service which provides you all the layout information. So if you have an item, if you have a page item, and using layout service, if you call that item, layout service will give you full JSON of information with Sitecore fields, on that item fields, information, as well as placeholders, renderings, presentation, everything, and also personalized content as well. This is what makes headless services very strong in Sitecore world, because it can give you the personalized content. You are not losing, customers are not losing any of the functionalities, personalized content as well. So that is what the layout service is. It provides you REST API endpoint. It is a structured one. I think Andy Perry from Perth in Australia, he has a very good YouTube or very good session on the layout service in detail. I think 1 or 1.5 hour session in detail explains about full layout service, what it is and all. I like one of the term he uses there. It is a structured JSON. So it is structured JSON, even though you can say, because you can change the, you can customize the layout service, because everything is customizable in layouts in Sitecore world. So you can customize the layout service, but this layout service, even though you customize, it still holds some structure of it, so, to JSON. So whole thing, if any of the, anywhere you are building some website or some smart device, some app, if that can read a JSON, it can hit the layout service and it can get the data and it can read and build that overall everything. So even though we keep saying that it supports React, Angular, Vue, and ASP.NET Core and Next.js, it's not necessary. Although you get a lot of benefits out of it, but it is not necessary. You can still build the applications. Whole point of Headless CMS. You can still build the applications hitting layout service and consuming the JSON and read the JSON on by yourself and build your build your components or everything. So that's a layout service. Content resolvers. So when layout service gives you the content, it gives you the rendering and it gives you the content for that rendering and all, right? So whereas a content resolver, so it understands, it try to understand, because most of the time where does our data source comes from, whether the particular component, the data comes from the page, maybe the fields are present on the page, or maybe the fields are present on some other data source, or maybe they're part of some children. So like that, we have different way we read, right, in MVC world when we are building a component. Similarly, in the content resolvers is some concept in JSS or in headless services where you have already existing resolvers. So you have a item resolver, item content resolver, item children resolvers, item data source resolvers. So there are like quite a bunch of them. You can build custom content resolvers as well. So this works based on the request. So again, if you're talking in exemplar, that's a whole different. But that's one thing. The next one is rendering host. Maybe if you're working very new in Sitecore world, you are not seeing the server infrastructure and all, maybe bear with me, but whoever is working on Sitecore for a long time, for CM, CD setups and the production, processing, reporting, all the server roles and everything, rendering host is one role there. So rendering host is mainly you can say simply a Node.js or ASP.NET Core rendering server or an app which serves your request. So when you when user hits the request or the browser, the request will be sent to rendering host. Host will hit your layout service API, and layout service API will give the data and rendering host will give us. So rendering host is where your node services will be running. Node in front-end world is like a back-end functionalities, back-end server-side renderings happens there. So if you are in the architecture, if you are looking at the architectural diagrams, rendering host becomes one more new role in the Sitecore implementations or Sitecore deployments. So you do need to deploy some of the things into the rendering host. Next one is GraphQL service. So layout service will give you the pretty much all the JSON and everything, right? But if you want query the data, there are some things are there, connected GraphQL or integrated ones. So integrated means on the rendering, okay, I'm going for like maybe some navigation component. That navigation is very complex. I want to query that. I mean, I don't have a data source. I don't have a fields for that. Rather, I have some looping I need to do, some customizations I need to do. I can use a integrated GraphQL query. GraphQL is another service like REST API. So where you can query the database. I mean, you can query that whatever the behind the scenes and get the data, and that can be binded to rendering. That's the integrated one. Or you can also query for your component from wherever, or you want to consume the content, you can consume it. So like how you are querying the REST API, you can query the GraphQL. You can find like ton of differences between REST API and GraphQL. So there are advantages, disadvantages. I asked one of the lead or one of the person who worked on the JSS. When I met him in the during SUGCon, he mentioned one wonderful thing. So he said like REST API, use it when you are writing anything in the backend functionalities. So like we all have experience with web APIs, right? We build web APIs, we try to consume some other services. So you use the REST API in that sense. But use a GraphQL when you are hitting the APIs from your front-end apps, so that it consumes less data and you can query exactly what you want rather than getting an overload of all the data. So that's where the GraphQL is. Now, rendering engine is a bit of a different one. Again, you don't have this concept in normal. So rendering engine, it actually renders the content from your layout service. It consumes the content from the layout service and it renders. So you have a different rendering engine for Next.js, and you have a different rendering engine for JSS, React, Angular, Vue, and you have different for ASP.NET Core rendering. So the rendering engine mainly works like it consumes a layout service and it binds that presentation details. So that's where the main work happens. Okay. So these are some of the terminology. Again, if you sit and work, you can do one presentation for one of the topic here, but at least I hope you get familiarized with those terminologies. Now, with that in the context, let's see architectural diagram of like all the JSS, everything. So ignore let me tell you this import service, just get out of the way. So import service mainly for the Sitecore front-end developers. I mean, front-end developers in Sitecore world where they don't have a local Sitecore instance. They want to build Sitecore in the JSON, YAML files, all the mock data, everything, and then they can use the import service and push it to or deploy it to the Sitecore instance. That's where the import service. But we are talking in the context of Sitecore developers, right? So again, if we are having a lot of Sitecore developers, we don't use this at all in our projects. So leave that for now. But let's see. So item is here. So now items. We talked about Headless CMS where Sitecore instance is sitting one side, but whereas your APIs, you are using APIs to consume and show it on website, right? So in this case, your items is here. All we want is an item for our apps. So where this whole block is Sitecore. So you see how many type of services Sitecore provides you. It is providing you layout service, which we just discussed. It gives you root JSON, and it gives you all the presentation details, everything it gives you in the JSON format. And a dictionary service, again, it provides you a dictionary related information from the JSON. You have all other things here. You use GraphQL, you use item data, SSE, Sitecore Services Client, everything. So everything is part of Sitecore instance here. So when you are browsing, you can use any of these services to consume. So there are two differences here you can find again. So layout service here, it is telling Node.js server. This is what I talked about just before. This is what is called rendering host. So your rendering host is this Node.js server. So you are hitting this Node.js and you are getting the layout service. But whereas it is called integrated mode. So if your Node.js is sitting inside the CM environment or in the Sitecore instance itself, maybe out of the process, that will provide from the layout service and it will directly give you the HTML. You don't need a rendering host in that instance, but you would be still required when you are scaling or in the production environments. But in general, you can still just use the rendering engine on the Sitecore instance itself, which is running out of process. So again, it has some scaling issues and everything. Too deep, so it's a different architectural one. If you are working simply as a developer, you don't need to know all this as well. You're just starting with the work. So yeah, I know that I'm running out of time, but I want to take a few more slides here. Just let's go. So development workflows. MVC world, it's a different way we are working. Front end gives us HTML, we build it. Right? It works in it works differently in. Sorry, hang on. Sorry, my daughter came. Development workflows. So you have code first and Sitecore first. I'm talking about MVC world. You have a different things. I mean, Sitecore front end. I mean, front end teams give us HTML. MVC, we have free hold of all the HTML. We bind it with our components and done with it. But in SXA, it's a kind of we get some HTML from some wireframe HTML from SXA components and some HTML from front end. We bind it. We try to make it work. So in JS's world, it's a more like similar like that. You still have HTML. You still have like more predominantly front end development, but whereas it can go in both the ways, code first and Sitecore first. I am mostly worked in, I mean, whatever the projects I worked on, like looked at in the Sitecore first, because what is the difference here? Mainly, front-end developers works in disconnect mode. Imagine I'm a front-end developer. I don't want install. I'm working on a Mac and I don't want to install Sitecore. I just want to work with all my components. In that case, I just work in disconnected mode. All the content I will mock it in those YML and JSON files. So, and when using that import service, I just push all this and it goes to the Sitecore and create items. But whereas Sitecore first, I have Sitecore developers. So the information architecture is handled by them, and front-end developers can still work in disconnected mode, maybe with some contract like, okay, this is how my item is going to be. So you can mock a similar way and you can work it. Or some of the projects what we worked on is we deploy to one dev machine, one of the server, and we create everything there. Front-end developers connect to that system so that they don't need to mock, they can just consume that. I mean, they have all the items available. Again, it depends on individual team's choice, how they want to do it. Application modes, I'll just quickly run through. So disconnected mode, we just saw, it's the same thing. So disconnected mode is like front-end developers prefer, where code first it is. Connected mode, again, it is more like a Sitecore first, where you still, everything gets from Sitecore instance and it is by the browser. Integrated mode is pretty much similar to connected mode, but all the work is still done by your server. So remember from the server side rendering concept, so your server will render all the content. This works well because you need to use the experience editor and everything in Sitecore, right? Because you're not deploying to Sitecore anymore, but still experience editor, everything need to work. So that's where your integrated mode, everything you uses for the CMS. So again, some of the application modes for the production environment, again, if you are new, ignore for now, but if you're already working on Sitecore, so server side as well. So you see this end user, JSS app browser, your node load balancer. You don't have this two parts and this node load balancer before, right? Your requests are going to CD load balancer and your requests are served from here. But here in JSS world, you have a JS node apps, proxy apps. So this is called headless server-side rendering proxy. So your request will go to node load balancer first, and node load balancer will pick one of the node service, and it reads, it consumes the layout service from the CD server, and it executes it and gives the HTML back to the browser. Your CD servers also gets behind the firewalls. You will only be accessed by proxies. I mean, traditionally in the CM environments will be behind the firewalls, right? You are not exposing that to public. Similarly, your CD servers also get behind the firewalls and behind the scenes. Only node proxies will be available publicly, so that your more security concerns. And if you want to scale it, you can scale these node servers, like increases node, and your CD, maybe based on the request, based on the calculation, you can scale them as well. This is integrated mode. This is another production deployment. Maybe you don't have that much scaling and everything. You don't need a separate node servers and all. So in this way, the integrated mode means it's everything similar. You're still going to the CD in like Sitecore MVC and XSA, but your request will be going to behind the scenes in the CD. You will have out of process node engine as well. So that node engine will consume the layout and it will generate the HTML and it will send to the user. So this is kind of a much smaller scale where your node services are sitting with your CD server and CM server for the integrated mode to work with experience editor and all. So it depends on both. So it depends on your architecture, your scaling and everything. Okay, I mean, I talked about a lot of things here, headless CMS, headless services, rendering types and all things. So I'm a Sitecore developer. I mean, even I am. So what it all makes sense going forward. So okay, one more thing before that, I purposefully did not put a demos and everything here because it takes a long time. And also there are like a lot of wonderful videos out there, wonderful blog posts out there, which explains in detail how do you set up the Node.js, how do you set up your React app or Next.js app, how do you connect to your Sitecore, how do you deploy, everything is there. So my agenda for this whole session is to give you like an overview of all these concepts, just to make some sense of like while reading it, rather than like scratching my head, what is this? Again, coming back to the main point of whole session is like, okay, what is the future of Sitecore developer? One thing for sure is you can't call anymore Sitecore developer is a, .NET developer. That was a term we used a lot. Sitecore or .NET developer is very synonym. So we use that term a lot, but now we can't use anymore because Sitecore developers are more and more full stack developers. But the line blurs a little because some of the projects you have Sitecore team predominantly works on all the Sitecore pieces. Front-end team gives and front-end team takes care of all the React components and everything. But some of the places, both we only work, maybe HTML, maybe just a HTML developer will give us a HTML, but React components still Sitecore developer builds. So again, it depends on your company, your team, your organization, how you are building the team. But Sitecore developers, one thing we can say, they're not just .NET developers anymore. They're either full stack or they can do maybe backend, but it is like very big projects, only maybe one or two backend developers will be there. So that's where the line blurs. These are all the technologies we are currently working on. So .NET, MVC, C#, Solar, all these things, and deployments, Azure, Octopus. Most of these things are still there. We will still work, but there are some new technology in the ecosystem as well. So React, Angular, Vue, I think some of you might have worked already. If not, yeah, those are new. Next.js is very, very new in Sitecore world. It's just like last couple of years. Next.js and versatile deployments go hand in hand. Node.js. If I'm a backend developer, I have to start learning all these things. I have to start learning how this Node NPM packages work, how I set up the project. Second, I need to understand the React component structure, HTML and everything. I need to understand TypeScript. I need to understand GraphQLs. And if you have already worked on, that's fine. If you have not worked on, again, you need to understand the Docker and AKS as well. AKS, maybe if you are deploying, but if you are like pretty junior or you're working just freshly, you don't need to worry about that. But in your local setup, you have to work on Docker. You have to use the TypeScript. You have to use Node.js, maybe React and everything based on whatever the JSS client SDK we use. So that's where the ecosystem is leading. You can't just be a backend developer anymore. But it's nothing scary. We have to slowly transition. There is a funny thing, right? Like you started your career as a developer. That means you decided or you make yourself peace that you need to learn lifelong. You need to do the homework lifelong. So technology will keep changing. You will keep learning. So that's where I want to leave all. Again, if you want, like maybe you started learning freshly, you want some help. Maybe I'm also learning, so maybe I can help you a bit. Maybe we can all help each other a bit, like maybe study sessions or learning sessions we can do. Together we can kind of do demos. Together we can build some apps so that we can learn. Not all of you, I know that you don't get the projects based on the client and everything, but you want to learn. Yeah, we can help each other. That's the way I am seeing it. Yeah, that's all from my side. If you have any questions, you can reach me there or feel free to ask here.